Welcome to the Strategy-Led Podcast. One of the remarkable things about times of change is that you can kind of admire firsthand people who just appear ready for it. They understand the change seemingly intuitively. They've built new processes around it, and they're just running when the rest of us are trying to figure out what's up and down. And I think in the world of AI-driven content marketing right now, Kristin Tynski is one of those people. She's the Senior Vice President of Creative and co-founder of Fractl. We haven't met previously. I've been following her on LinkedIn for the last few months, where she's really established herself as a leader in the use of AI within content marketing in particular. So I have a lot of questions. Kristin, welcome. I'm really excited to get to know you.
Yeah, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to talk about this stuff too. It's been on my mind a lot for a while now, and it's exciting how many new applications exist and how many have yet to be discovered. So yeah, it should be a fun talk.
For sure. I want to start with you've been ahead of, I think, a lot of people that I see in talking about how you use AI for great marketing. So I want to start with the big picture. What has been your approach and how does AI fit into your strategy?
I guess I should say I've been fascinated with AI for maybe 4 or 5 years, like right around the time when GPT-2 came out, or maybe slightly before that, and just absolutely stunned and amazed, even with the quality of what GPT-2 was able to create. And I just think I had an intuition that this technology could be leveraged for numerous different aspects of the creative process. So at Fractl, we essentially do data journalism content on behalf of brands. And so we're always looking for new sorts of methodologies for executing really interesting and newsworthy content that we then pitch on behalf of brands to major publishers in an effort to get earned media and then the link value that accrues as a result of earning media and the syndication that happens naturally as a result of that. So I've been thinking about how we could apply generative AI to all aspects of what we do at Fractl, and also trying to think about how it might impact the greater industry. So lots of experiments around content creation, ideation, specific steps within the content creation process, especially in the process of doing data journalism. So how it can be applied to data cleaning and data analysis, data augmentation, and also how it could potentially be applied to more technical SEO tasks, and how it could be applied to automating certain parts of the outreach process. So things like building pitch lists and writing pitches and revising pitches and things like that. In my mind, there's a ton of experiments that I've already run, and then also a million more that I haven't yet. And so for me, it's just a really exciting time to explore the limits of these large language models and what they might be capable of doing, and how that can be applied to specific processes within my agency, or specific processes that might be useful for people who work in the content marketing, SEO, or PR industries in general.
And so I think with the type of content that you produce, which is, my background's in content marketing as well, though it's been some time, but I would say the difference between great content and content that actually has an impact is vast. So I would imagine the process that you have for creating this type of content is quite extensive, which gives you a lot of opportunities to insert AI tools or new methodologies into what you do. Is that a fair kind of...
Yeah, it definitely is. So because we're doing essentially data journalism, we're trying to come up with newsworthy ideas that leverage either existing data sets that we can scrape ourselves. So doing social scraping, leveraging government data sets, proprietary data sets, our clients' data sets, and then doing a lot of surveying too. So there are obviously applications for generative AI in helping in all of those steps that are all exciting to me. And I've done some explorations on some of them, but a lot more to come.
And I think what sets you apart in particular is your use of Python to combine the power of ChatGPT, or really GPT-3, 3.5, with other data sources, or I guess to scale the number of prompts and queries that you can run. I've got a lot of questions about this, and some of them are just things that I want to know. So just bear with me, please. But I think why is this approach more powerful than how kind of the vast majority of people use ChatGPT?
I think there are probably 2 main ways so far that I've discovered, although there are certainly more. The first is this idea of prompt chaining. So the way that most people are using GPT-3 or ChatGPT is giving it a single prompt. Maybe that prompt is even very complex, but giving a single prompt and then getting an answer from from ChatGPT or GPT-3 and then parsing it in certain ways. But you can force it to do much more than that, to be more thorough in its analysis or in its generation of the questions that you're asking it, by taking it through like a step-by-step process of prompting it, getting a generation back, and then using what it generated as a source for a secondary or tertiary prompt. And you could really chain them together in unlimited number of prompts to generate either large amounts of content or to refine the content over time in different ways through different prompting. And the second way is really about leveraging external data sets and injecting external data into the prompts or prompt chains that you're creating. So either third-party APIs or your own existing data or the previous generations from earlier prompts. All of that can be used in your prompt chains to generate some additional amazing things that you wouldn't have been able to get necessarily from just a single prompt of GPT-3.
So I think big picture, what you're able to do is you're able to take the Reddit feed, for example, and pull 1,000 headlines of Reddit pages, pull that right into ChatGPT or GPT-3 and get it to run a series of questions against all of that data. Is that kind of, at least when you bring in external data, that's what the approach looks like?
Yeah, that's exactly right. So just to like give an example of what the prompt chaining might look like for, say, doing data journalism ideation. So the first prompt would ask for data sources, for instance. So give me a list of existing external data sets or data sources that you know of that relate to X topic. And then you could use, for instance, Google search results or a database of Google Scholar results, which is essentially a data set of papers or any number of existing data set sources. And you could check and make sure that the data sets that ChatGPT or GPT-3 is suggesting to you are actual real ones. Or you could reverse the process and you could take a very long list of existing data sets and ask it to parse that list and select the ones that might be most appropriate for X topic. Or you could do a multi-step approach that tries to do both. So there's lots of different ways that you can combine multiple prompt steps with existing external data sources, either through APIs or by injecting stuff from like a data table of your own to do much more complex multi-step analysis that results, in my opinion, generally a more thorough exploration of the things that ChatGPT could come up with. If you're just giving it a single prompt, I think part of the problem is that you generally will get the most common or most generic answers first. And so the key really is to expand the latent space of potential topics or subtopics or whatever category of things it is you're looking for. Try and make that as large as possible and then use a multi-step prompt process to refine it with different prompting stages that kind of do different things. Maybe the first stage is just come up with as many data sources as possible relating to this subtopic. And then the next stage is out of this list that you've generated, which ones might be most appropriate for XYZ audience. And then the third stage would be like, okay, use these data sources to come up with actual ideas. And then you could even go further than that and say, okay, now that you've come up with the ideas on that, add to that idea list or extend the ideas or refine the ideas or critique the ideas and then take that next step and keep going. So yeah, you're almost like trying to give ChatGPT like a thought process, which is related to this concept in AI called chain of thought reasoning, which is a big thing and being used more and to some extent being built into new language models. Yeah, I think the more you can give it a really clear understanding of the steps that you want it to take to do whatever your task is, the better the result ultimately is going to be.
I think one of the scary and exciting things about chain of thought reasoning is they don't actually know why it works. But I think there's a few of those categories within this space.
It's pretty crazy, actually. Just by adding the phrase, think step by step, you can generally improve the output of the generation.
So in Python, you can chain prompts. Is that right? And are you doing that by sending a prompt out, getting the response, and then using the response in your follow-up prompt? Or are you actually able to open up a prompt chain with ChatGPT directly? So we've worked on this ourselves within Google Sheets and using the connection to ChatGPT there, which does a little bit of what you're talking about, just not at the scale. What we've found is we can trick it into chaining prompts by pulling some data and then sending that data back with the next prompt. Is that pretty much what you do with Python as well?
Yeah, and you definitely can do prompt chaining in Excel or Google Sheets that, you've installed the plugin for ChatGPT. I would say it's restrictive in the sense that it would be difficult to add like external data sources.
I don't think I don't think it even compares there. The main thing that I'm getting at here is there's such a difference between a single prompt approach and multi-prompt. And so anything like when we're looking at like, where are we going to invest, where I'm giving people advice, this is the approach to take. I feel like it has to have a multi-prompt or a chain prompt approach built into it, or they're going to go down a path that just leads to lots of generic information. And so I think that's just one of those elements of all the different ways that people are going about it that's worth kind of checking from the start. Is this going to give me the best version of the outputs that the model can provide?
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. And the advantage of using Python is that you could do it much more quickly. So there's this latency with trying to use it inside of Excel or Google. You can also do things like asynchronous API calls. So like you're not waiting for it to do one, send the prompt to GPT and then get the response, then send the next prompt and get the response. You can, depending on how your script is constructed, you can make all of those calls at the same time if they don't rely on a previous generation's response. But if they do, you can do other things to speed it up significantly. I think also, you can correct me if I'm wrong, but I also don't think you have full control over what the API call is when you're using like the script for Google Sheets. I don't think you can necessarily manipulate the temperature or the stop words or things like that. Maybe you can, I could be wrong. But yeah, and then if we're talking about ChatGPT, which the API for ChatGPT came out last week, like Thursday or Friday last week, that's a little bit different because the API call that you're using is actually sending like a multi-stage prompt to the API where you're first defining like the system itself. So like the persona you want ChatGPT to take on, and then you can give like an unlimited number of chat turns. So like you say something and then you can define what you want ChatGPT to say specifically, like the exact phrasing, and then you give some response to that. So it's sort of like with GPT-3 when you're giving like multiple examples of a generation, it's just a different interface that is more of like a chat format. And I've only done a little bit of exploring with it so far, but ChatGPT API is 10 times cheaper, or it is only 10% the cost of DaVinci, DaVinci 03, which is the ChatGPT-3 or the GPT-3 model that most of the scripts that I've released so far have been using.
So it's 10%. Okay, I quickly wanted to get to that because I think that's not on anyone's radar who isn't pulling volumes of queries, but you literally are looking at some of these tasks that you do in terms of how many tokens does it generate, basically how much server capacity does it use and how much is that going to cost. I've seen in some of your posts on LinkedIn, you've been like, hey, watch out, this will cost you like $8 just to run this once. How do you get to that volume?
So with GPT-3, you're paying on like a per token basis, and the cost is a combination of the prompt, the length of the prompt that you send, and the length of the generation that you request. So you have to add those two together. And a token is essentially like a part of a word. So most words are 3 to 4 tokens. I don't know the exact price per token for text GPT-3, but yeah, it's certainly possible with a multi-stage prompt where you're like, say you're generating 10 ideas or say you're generating 10 topics, and then the next stage you're generating 10 subtopics for each topic, right? Then you've gotten to 100 for your third step. So then maybe say you're doing 10 ideas for each subtopic, that like it's over 1,000 API calls to GPT-3 for that. And depending on the length of the prompt and the requested completion at each stage, it's going to use a lot of tokens. So you have to be, especially with a multi-stage prompt or chain of prompts, you need to be careful that you're not like exponentially increasing the number of API requests that happen at each stage. But yeah, with ChatGPT, it's become, now that it's 10 times cheaper, it's a lot easier to sort of push the limits on that and really in your first do a 3 or 4 stage thing that is like exponentially increasing the number of API calls that are made because it's so much cheaper. And that gets you to a place where you can just explore the possibilities a lot more in depth.
I think that's a great transition, explore the possibilities, because one thing that I get the impression of is that you're looking at this in terms of how can I create better content or content that maybe you've had more time to think about this. What do you see as the opportunities? Because that's something on this podcast I really want to be focusing on, is not just kind of we can work faster or it's going to replace this, but look what we can now do and how exciting that is.
Yeah, I think it's important to think of GPT-3 sort of as like a human assistant, because it really is capable of doing most things, including highly creative things that a person could do. And of course, it's like prone to confabulation and it does make things up. So you still need a human in the loop for everything that you do. But we don't know what the limits of it are really yet, or what it's truly capable of, or what GPT-4 will be capable of when it comes out in 6 months to a year or whatever. Yeah. For me, I think the biggest thing is that no individual human has like the breadth of knowledge that ChatGPT has, right? Like it was trained on essentially the entire internet. So it's capable of expanding your creative horizons to like an enormous degree, right? And helping you to understand more fully what you might not be aware of yet. For even something that you think you're an expert on. You're probably not, at least compared to GPT-3. But then it's also capable of lots of other interesting things. Like, so in the data journalism work that we do at Fractl, a lot of time is spent doing like data cleaning and data analysis tasks or data augmentation tasks. And so it can do really interesting things. Like one of the scripts that I wrote and released on LinkedIn basically uses GPT-3 to do labeling of clusters. So the first step in doing that is like taking your corpus and then making it into embeddings, which are essentially just like normalized values that show the relationships between the words in the corpus or the different elements in the corpus. And so you can make embeddings of them, and you can use OpenAI's embeddings API if you want, but there are other free embedding tools, like Hugging Face has one called Sentence Transformer, which works with a similar technology to generate the embeddings. And then once you have embeddings for the text corpus that you're working with, you can run lots of different sorts of clustering algorithms on them to cluster them into groups depending on their similarity. So say, for instance, you scraped all, or you got all of the keywords from Ahrefs that exist in your given space. You could embed all of those keywords and then cluster them and get all of the keywords that were most similar to each other into labeled categories. And it's been possible to do that for a long time, like 10, 20 years. But the new transformer models like Sentence Transformer or GPT-3's embeddings are much better than they used to be. So they do a much better job in doing that clustering and categorization or putting those elements into the categories. But what they've never been capable of doing is then like telling you what that category is about. Like they were clustered properly because they know about the semantic similarity of the keywords or data in each discrete category, but it still required like a human to look at that and say, okay, say it's about fishing. This cluster here is about like fishing rods, and this cluster here is about like fishing locations or types of fish or something like that. Now you can use GPT-3 to take each cluster and evaluate the cluster for what it's about and say, okay, this cluster is about this cluster is about that, and do it automatically and at scale. So that sort of thing is amazing to me.
Just to pause on that quickly, sure. But I want to come back and hear your next example as well. But following along, what I heard there was you used it to do really great keyword research, but then basically you could give it a huge list of keywords, export from Ahrefs. There's going to be some work you need to do to prepare the data, or at least give it the parameters to label it within, something like that. Kind of talking this through to see if I understand what you said, because I'm not as advanced in the use of Python and the code that you're talking about. And then you can get it to really do the whole process. So come back with, it's got all the groupings of keywords. It's got what is this about? And then you probably can just keep going and be like, scrape the top 10 search results for the primary keyword here. And what's the structure? I think I saw one of your scripts is what is the structure of search results for those? So you can just keep going, and it's just all automated, right? These are things that SEOs and content marketers have been doing for years, but step by step, methodically. And the way you see it, like you just start with a list of keywords, have the right approach, and you will get all of this output.
Yeah. Yeah, that's absolutely the case. And you can infinitely extend it, right? And you can use other AI technologies like embeddings and clustering to address other specific aspects of the task that you're working on, instead of trying to do it manually, which honestly with something like cluster labeling is extremely hard to do and would be massively time consuming to try and do on the large corpus of data.
Yeah.
But it's a useful thing to do for keyword research, for understanding the universe of your competition, or looking at content gaps or topical gaps of you versus your competitors. So there are a ton of applications of doing clustering and then labeling it with GPT-3. But that's just one use case. And there's so many use cases, right? Like you could apply the same thing to analyzing any corpus of data, like Reddit, for instance. You could connect it to the Reddit API, pull the top 5,000 posts from a given subreddit, embed them, do the clustering, and then have GPT-3 label the clusters and get like an incredible sense of all of the topics that are talked about and keep the metadata for it too, right? So like how many upvotes does X subtopic category have? How many comments on average does this category have? And like really understand behaviorally how that given subreddit works with regards to content topics or any other metric that you care about. Yeah.
So a lot of the scripts that you share, at least that you share publicly, are research focused. I'm interested to know, what does your process look like after that? You don't have to explain your whole process, but I'm wondering kind of where's the extent of where you're using the model versus turning back to writers, editors, content marketers, planners. Like, how does the process go from these incredible research and kind of foundational? I think keyword research has so many uses across marketing, but like go from that to one of these like really big data journalism pieces that, and I assume you probably would produce a big piece and then lots of content all around it from various different sources. So
yeah,
you don't have to give away anything you don't want to give away, but I'm just interested to know, because I think, again, a lot of people go right to, we can get it to write for us, or I'm not sure. I'm interested to know your thoughts and opinion on that.
Yeah. So I should say that we don't use like any purely generated content for any client deliverables or anything like that. We're using it as an assistant in our existing processes for creating content that we think will be successful according to our own rubrics of success.
Yeah.
So the way that we use it, it differs depending on the needs of that particular project, at least when we're talking about like data journalism style work. And we do such a huge variety of types of executions. It would be different. Like say, you can use it for generating survey questions, for instance. So that's something we do a lot, just to understand what's the universe of questions you could ask.
Yeah.
What are the subtopics of things you could ask? And then even doing secondary steps to use GPT-3 to refine the questions on, or have it evaluate those questions and say, okay, which ones are most likely to yield a newsworthy result, or which ones are most interesting, or which ones would be most appropriate for X target audience. And then we use it for ideation a lot as well. So the script that I put out that was basically defining a topic, subtopics, defining existing data sources, using those data sources as fodder for the data journalism ideas, and then iterating on those ideas. We use that too.
So basically get 50 ideas out, and then someone's just going through this one. Oh, this one's okay, but these 10 are terrible, pulling them out. And then you start to brainstorm and get into what could we do with this? And is that?
Yeah. We do collaborative ideation sessions every day with the whole creative team, broken up into like different sections. So we always have a brief is about, and so now we're using GPT-3 to help us fill out the brief and give us a starting point for coming up with ideas. So the brief will have all of the topics built out that we could address, all the data sources that might be useful for this ideation, lots of sample ideas, and then the humans themselves use that as a basis for coming up with ideas. And sometimes GPT-3 generates ideas that are amazing just out of the box. Other times they are just inspiration for new ideas that the humans at Fractl come up with. So yeah, it's pretty variable. We really think about it as like an assistant technology and not do it for you technology. I think the combination of human plus GPT-3 is a lot better than GPT-3 by itself or humans by themselves.
Yeah. And I think that right there is probably one of the first insights that we've had been working with it, is that you need to be an expert in what you're using it for, because then you can find the great outputs that it delivers amidst everything else. And everything else would be the majority, but there's still gold nuggets in there that make it all worthwhile.
Absolutely. I
think that you are someone who really understands from a couple different angles the power of data. And I think this is a little bit bigger, but we're moving into an era where the value of data is changing pretty dramatically, in my opinion. And I wonder if you have thought and reflected on that, and if there's anything, that you think people should know about how they look at their data. It doesn't have to be necessarily personal, or businesses should know how they look at their data moving forward.
Yeah, from a content marketing perspective, I think, and I've written about this a little bit on LinkedIn, but I think these generative language models and other generative types of models like image generators and things, they're going to change the economy of information value and the economy of certain types of content. I think if you can use GPT-3 to generate something, I think the value of that trends ultimately towards zero or near zero. So you need to consider what sort of content is going to continue to remain valuable in this new ecosystem where information or the aggregation of information is essentially becoming free. And in my opinion, that's going to result in human content being more valuable. So like video content, for instance, and then more complex analysis and data journalism type work, I think will also become more valuable for that same reason, that it's not possible today, and it's probably not possible in the close future to say, hey, GPT-3, do a data journalism project on X topic for me, right? Yeah. One of the biggest problems with these models is that they make up information, or they're prone to making up information. They also can't effectively analyze massive sets of data. There's a context window of 4,000 token, or like 1,000 words, essentially, or like 1,000 to 2,000 words that it can take in at any given time. I think that will change. I think the context window will get much larger in future versions, but it still wouldn't be able to do this multi-step reasoning that currently only humans are really capable of doing, at least to the extent that process requires like lots of discrete types of tasks that would need to be accomplished successfully in order to execute the entire project. So it needs to be able to do the data acquisition itself, the cleaning itself, the analysis itself, pick out the most salient and important aspects of it, be able to tell a story and a long form story in the right way, be able to generate data visualizations that are high quality, and other things like creating interactive web apps and things that might be included in the story. So there's a lot more to creating a really in-depth piece of content that uses data to tell a story. And I think that sort of content will remain in the realm of humans only for quite a while. Although if I'm wrong about that, then it changes everything. What happens to journalism in general if an AI can do this? Yeah. It would be a very interesting and exciting thing to witness, because then you could instantly explore a million questions that are important to humans. And a lot of the things that go unnoticed would suddenly become known. And yeah, so I don't know if that lies in our future, but I don't think it does within the next 5 to 10 years. So I think the more complex type of content, and then the more human, right? So like actual person to person communication also becomes more important, because I think we're going to enter into a phase where people are able to differentiate, at least to a certain extent, what's been like obviously generated by an AI. There are models that can do this, but I think humans will gain an intuition for, oh, this was generated by an AI.
I think potentially those of us who have a background in SEO are already better at it, because we can see how much it's been trained on the terrible content that we wrote over so many years. Just the formal nature of its tone, just it has a shadow of SEO optimized content over the last decade, just training that cadence in. But I think that's really interesting to think that we're going to get to a point where people are just used to this. And so it just becomes quite clear what is, I was going to say unique, but it's all unique. What was created by a human versus AI.
Yeah, I think that topic goes a lot further too, right? Because some of it won't be differentiable to humans. Yeah. And I think it will necessitate some sort of system or process for being able to prove that something was human generated versus not. And it's not clear that other AI models will be capable of clearly differentiating human from AI written content, especially like shorter form stuff. Even OpenAI's current model for identifying its own written content has like a 10 or 20% false positive rate, which makes it essentially useless for most use cases. Yeah. What's that mean for search engines? I don't know. It's going to be weird.
I mean, there's just so much content that is not long form, that is not in depth. One of the most straightforward use cases is like Google Ads copy. Right? Trying to figure out, did the AI write Google Ads copy versus just a headline and the description, right? It's 100 characters. Yeah. That's going to be virtually impossible. Maybe if you looked at like a whole campaign build, you could say, oh, okay, this is too consistent between this must have been created by an AI. Human just doesn't have that ability. I wanted to just quickly, I think like everything that you've talked about with data journalism, and I think in particular what you're just saying about where humans add value, and this is one of the things that we're trying to focus on a lot. It's weird to be saying humans so often, but where we add value in the process. I wonder if you don't mind talking through the police data accessibility project, which I think is, for me, I've just been reading about it a little bit, and it seems like an incredible example of something that started as content marketing, or sorry, I've just drawing a blank on the term you use, data journalism, excuse me, started there, but then turned into something bigger because of the power of the content that you had created. Do you want to just talk through that quickly? I think it really does reflect on everything that you've been talking to so far.
Sure. Although that project didn't leverage AI really at all.
No, this is in the past. It's just something that to me, it shows your process, the type of content that you produce. And then given the conversation that we've had now, I think we can see where AI could intersect with something of this sort, basically.
Sure. Yeah. This is probably a content marketing project that I did personally for a Fractl-owned website. And I do a lot of this sort of thing because my role really at Fractl is not managing the creatives individually myself. There's someone under me who manages them day to day. But I'm looking for ways to push the envelope in terms of what Fractl is capable of producing, looking for new extensible methodologies for the work that we do, and then obviously new tools and processes for partially automating or supplementing each stage of the process that we do at Fractl. So this was really just one of those, exploring an idea that I had. And really it started by realizing that in the county I live in, which is Palm Beach County, Florida, and this is true of every county really, or almost every county in the United States, there's a public portal for getting police data information, which includes arrest information, traffic stop information, and then a huge amount of metadata related to each of those individual instances, including who was arrested, what their gender was, what their age was, where this happened, who the arresting officer was or the stopping officer was, the outcome of the case, and a lot more. So it's really interesting, fascinating data, and also potentially very important data. So at Fractl, we wrote a scraper to get all of this information because unfortunately, and this is true again of almost all of these county level portals that exist across the United States, you can get the information you're looking for, but you have to ask for one date at a time or paginate through it in a bunch of awkward ways, or basically it's not made to be able to get all of the data at once. And so if you can't do that, then you can't really do any data journalism work on the data itself unless you have all of it. There's no way to find trends in it. There's no way to find anomalies or outliers in it without getting all of it. So it started by writing a scraper to get all of the data for the last, I think it was 10 years. And then I just did some of my own investigation into the data, just trying to find, like I said, trends, outliers, different elements of what the data was showing that might point to specific behavioral things on behalf of the police. And so I wrote an article about the findings of it, and it found a few interesting things, and nothing super sensational or super terrible, but enough to make the case that you can use this data to do interesting investigations about specific behavior of police departments or individual officers even, or find hidden biases or bad behavior or long-term trends using this. So I wrote this article, and then, as I often do with content that we create, promoted it on Reddit. If you have something very interesting and it matches with the subreddit really well, then it's certainly worth posting it and seeing what happens. And so I posted it to the privacy subreddit and a few others, but privacy was the one where it took off. Front page that subreddit and got a lot of engagement and comments and things. And this was right around the time when the George Floyd incident happened. So part of it was really around people wanting to be able to do something tangible. And I wanted to do something tangible too. And I had been doing this prior to that incident happening. And so I made this post and it did well on Reddit. And then I thought to myself, there are all these people out here in this thread who are saying I wish I could do something, or I'd like to do something like this. But the problem is that all of this data is spread across literally thousands or tens of thousands of county level portals that are not standardized really in any way. And you would need to essentially write scrapers for most of them. Luckily, some of them are actually somewhat standardized, at least within a state. So you can write one scraper and get lots of counties. But yeah, I made a secondary post talking about wanting to start a Slack community around this idea that it might be possible to get a lot of people together and make it an open source project that allowed people to contribute different parts of what needed to be done in order to create a truly accessible data portal for local police data. And that post also did very well on the privacy subreddit. And I ended up getting 2,500 people joining the Slack channel that I created to do this. And that was really all I had planned. I wanted to see if other people wanted to join in on this. And because so many people joined, it was very active for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. And then it dwindled down a bit to people who were actually committed enough to want to see something like this through. And it got down to a core group of maybe 10 or 20 people that then actually kind of took it from there. Like I really didn't do much more than help a little bit with the initial setup steps. They really self-organized and created like a hierarchy of reporting structure and different roles and responsibilities, and very clearly defined what the mission would be. And then I helped get a law firm who was willing to take us on pro bono to set up a nonprofit organization for it. And beyond that, really, I've only done promoting of the nonprofit. Yeah. So just trying to get more people involved. And I've done that a few times over the last couple of years, but it hasn't been me running it at all. So I can't take credit beyond that initial post and bringing people together on the idea. But I think it was just a really good example of if you have the right idea at the right time and you can present it to the right community, you can create a cohesive engagement that people want to work on together, and that just snowballs on its own. It ended up becoming a nonprofit and then received a $250,000 grant about a year and a half ago. And so they've been using that I think they hired 2 full-time employees and trying to get more grants and expand it from here. So they've actually done quite a bit.
I think there's the impact side of it, which is, I was reading some of the updates in there, and there's a big budget negotiation coming next month. We need a bunch of people to pull police data so that we can be ready for this. It's like real, right? People are using this to make an impact. And what I was thinking about is going all the way back to the start. Content marketers are just stuck in this place of trying to find something new to say, to publish. Half the time we're just rehashing stuff that's already out there to some degree. And then maybe we can find one piece of new information to add on to it to make it even worthwhile. I think the insight that your approach is built around seems to be that there's so much data out there in all these different places. If people understand how to use it and how to get it, there's tons of really valuable content available for marketers and businesses to create. The last thing I would say here is that a lot of times as marketers, we talk about value, and we'll talk about value in terms of maybe we say something funny, right? So there's a little bit of humor, or maybe we teach something, right? And that is worthwhile value within the context of marketing. But there's lots more types of value as well. And it seems like your content really starts to open up a lot more of that as well.
Yeah, and I think the real reason for that is because we're trying to create newsworthy content, stuff that journalists will pick up based on us pitching it to them. So it needs to actually be like relevant and interesting to the journalists, the beats that they cover, their target audiences. And the only way to do it predictably and consistently and at scale is through a data journalism style approach. There are other content types that are maybe extensible and can be redone multiple times in different ways. But in general, leveraging data, whether it's with surveys or scraped data or government data sets or company data sets, it doesn't really matter. As long as you're finding something actually new, then you have something potentially newsworthy and a story that a journalist would want to cover that could then be syndicated. So for most of our clients, it's still an SEO-driven goal. They're trying to earn super high authority links that their competitors can't earn. But yes, I would totally agree in that data is the source of the value creation there. And the amount of data that exists on the internet is growing exponentially. And the ability to get that data, parse that data, analyze that data, the ease of it is also growing exponentially through AI types of tools, but also tools just like Tableau, for instance, which all of our creatives use extensively. Tools that allow you to do the process of investigating data quickly, to build lots of different views, to find the interesting insights. And then something I'm really excited about that we haven't really talked about with regards to AI is that it can actually do data analysis on raw data itself. Say you have a spreadsheet that you use internally for keeping track of project deadlines, each employee's capacity or how much content they're producing and so on. You can just copy and paste a certain segment of it, probably not the whole thing because the context windows are still only 4,000 tokens, but pieces of it and say, analyze this data, pull out all of the things that are interesting or anomalous here. Give me additional questions I might ask about this data that would help me to find what's interesting in it. So the combination of way more data than we've ever had before, way more accessibility of getting that data than we've ever had before, and AI tools and other tools that help to explore and analyze that data is absolutely insane. Like it's like this compounding exponential thing that's happening. And that's why I'm so bullish about the future of data journalism and using data journalism as a methodology for brands to create value and also to earn press. So yeah, that's in general my thinking on it.
That's amazing. I think that's a good place to finish up. I could probably keep just asking you questions for quite some time, but I really appreciate your time. I've learned a lot. I'm sure the listeners will as well. To everyone out there, I highly recommend you follow Kristin on LinkedIn for sure. Is there anywhere else you would point people to go to follow you or Fractl or any content that you think would be worthwhile?
You can just email me directly at Kristin@Fractl if you have specific questions. But right now, I'm mostly focusing on LinkedIn for trying to create content for the industry. Yeah. I write for blogs sometimes or industry publications sometimes, but I would post that to LinkedIn too. Twitter is turned into a cesspool as far as I'm concerned. So I'm not focusing my time
here in
there
Australia.
anymore.
Twitter's not that big, so we don't play a lot in that space, but we watch from afar with amazement, I would say.
Yeah.
But yeah, so everyone go follow Kristin on LinkedIn. You will get tons of value there for sure. Thank you so much.
Yeah, I will also say that I like sharing some of the exploration scripts that I write of lots of different methodologies and use cases. So if you do follow me on LinkedIn, I usually post 2 or 3 of those a week and have done 8 or 9 so far, which I'm willing to share as well.
And I can vouch that even if you don't know the Python code, you can go inside the code and pull out some of the prompts, and there's good stuff in there as well. Yeah, regardless of how sophisticated you are in your approach, there's lots you can learn from Kristin. Thank you again. Wherever you're listening, please follow the Strategy-Led podcast so you don't miss an episode. We're going to talk with experts like Kristin as we navigate this time of disruption to change the game in marketing. So thanks so much for listening. Have a good one.